I'm Courtney, 32, and I never expected to face death alone at 25. When doctors found a tumor wrapped around my spine, my parents made their choice clear. My sister Heather's picture-perfect Napa Valley wedding mattered more than my emergency surgery. "We've already paid the deposits," my mother explained, avoiding my eyes. 7 years later, they appeared on my doorstep. Desperation etched on their faces. The tables had turned in ways none of us could have imagined. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from. Drop a like and subscribe to join our community of survivors who've learned that sometimes family isn't defined by blood. Growing up in our sprawling colonial home in the affluent suburbs of Boston, I learned early on where I stood in my family's hierarchy. My parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Warner, were fixtures in local high society. Dad, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. Mom, the quintessential socialite who chaired every important charity committee. Our family Christmas cards could have been advertisements for the perfect American family, but behind that polished veneer was a clear pecking order. My sister Heather, 3 years my senior, was the undisputed golden child. From her earliest years, she seemed programmed to fulfill our parents' dreams. Valedictorian debate team captain, Ivy League undergraduate, followed by Harvard Law. Every achievement was celebrated with lavish dinners and proud announcements to their entire social circle. The living room walls were a shrine to Heather's accomplishments. Honor roll certificates, law school graduation photos, and newspaper clippings of her courtroom victories. I, on the other hand, was the family's square peg. While Heather excelled in the subjects our parents valued, economics, political science, debate, I was drawn to art, literature, and photography. The first time I brought home a blue ribbon from a photography competition, my mother glanced at it and asked, "Wouldn't you rather join the debate team like your sister colleges look for that sort of thing?" My father was more direct. "Photography is a nice hobby, Courtney, but it's not a career. We expect you to pursue something practical." By high school, the pattern was firmly established. When my art teacher nominated me for a prestigious summer program at RISD, my parents refused to pay the tuition. "It's an indulgence," my father explained. "If you want to waste your summer taking pictures, you can get a job and pay for it yourself." That same year, they spent $20,000 sending Heather to an international law symposium in London. The disparity continued into college. Heather attended Princeton with our parents covering every expense: tuition, a spacious off-campus apartment, a new car, and generous spending money. When it was my turn, they agreed to pay tuition at Boston University, but insisted I work part-time for spending money and take out loans for my housing. "Your sister was an investment," my mother once said when I questioned the double standard. "Law has a return on investment. Photography." She trailed off with a shrug that spoke volumes. Despite everything, I maintained a relationship with my family. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, I showed up hoping for approval that never quite materialized. My strategy became proving myself through success on my own terms. After college, while Heather was climbing the ranks at a top Boston law firm and planning her wedding to Bradley, another lawyer from a good family, I moved to Chicago. The distance felt necessary for my sanity. There, I built a promising career in commercial photography, specializing in fashion and advertising shoots. By 25, I had a growing client list, a small but beautiful apartment in Wicker Park, and a supportive boyfriend named Mark who saw my worth without qualification. Mark was everything my family wasn't: supportive, kind, and genuinely interested in my creative pursuits. He was a graphic designer who understood the artistic temperament and never once suggested I pursue a real job. More importantly, he recognized the toxicity of my family dynamics in a way I was still coming to terms with. "You know it's not normal, right?" he asked one night after I'd been on the phone with my mother, who had spent 20 minutes talking about Heather's latest courtroom victory before asking a single question about my life. "The way they favor your sister, the way they dismiss your accomplishments. They just don't understand creative fields," I defended weakly. Mark shook his head. "It's more than that, Courtney. Parents are supposed to love their children equally, even if they don't always understand their choices." Deep down, I knew he was right, but admitting it felt like betrayal. So I continued the pattern, calling home weekly, visiting for major holidays, sharing my professional successes, only to have them minimized or ignored. It was during this period that I first noticed the pain. It started as a dull ache in my lower back that I attributed to long hours standing during photo shoots. When it didn't subside after a few weeks, I tried physical therapy, massage, even acupuncture. Nothing helped. Then came the numbness in my right leg, occasional at first, then increasingly persistent. Still, I pushed through taking anti-inflammatories and using heating pads between shoots. "You need to see a doctor," Mark insisted one evening when he found me lying on the floor, tears streaming down my face as I tried to find a position that didn't hurt. "After this big campaign wraps, I promised. I can't afford to miss it." But my body had other plans. The Seagram's vodka shoot was supposed to be my big break, a national campaign with billboards in Times Square. The client had specifically requested me after seeing my work in Chicago Magazine. It should have been one of the proudest days of my career. Instead, halfway through the 6-hour shoot as I was adjusting lighting for the fifth setup, my right leg suddenly gave out completely. The numbness I'd been ignoring for months turned into complete loss of sensation. I collapsed onto the studio floor, unable to stand. "Courtney," my assistant Lila rushed to my side. "What's happening?" "I can't feel my leg." I admitted, the fear in my voice unmistakable. "I can't make it move." The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, emergency room fluorescence, and increasingly concerned medical professionals. By evening, I was admitted to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and the next morning brought a parade of specialists to my room. The neurologist, Dr. Abrams, was a petite woman with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. She sat on the edge of my bed, MRI results in hand. "We found the cause of your symptoms," she said, turning the images so I could see. "There's a tumor wrapped around your spinal cord in the lumbar region. It's what we call an ependymoma, and it's been growing for some time based on its size." A tumor. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "Is it cancer?" "It's a type of cancer, yes, but one with a good prognosis if treated promptly," she explained. "The concerning issue right now is its location and the pressure it's putting on your spinal cord. That's what caused your leg to give out." "So what happens now?" "You need surgery, Courtney. Soon. The tumor is compressing your spinal cord, and the longer we wait, the greater the risk of permanent nerve damage or paralysis. In the worst case, if left untreated, it could eventually be life-threatening." "How soon is soon?" I asked, my photographer's mind already calculating rescheduled shoots and deadline extensions. Dr. Abrams' expression grew more serious. "Within the next 2 weeks, ideally. We need to assemble the right surgical team. This is a complex procedure requiring both neurosurgical and orthopedic expertise, but we can't afford to wait longer than that." The gravity of the situation finally hit me. This wasn't something I could power through or postpone. This was my life on the line. When Mark arrived at the hospital after work, I broke down in his arms, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of fear I'd been holding at bay. He held me tight, promising we'd get through this together. Then asked the practical question I'd been avoiding. "Have you called your parents yet?" I hadn't. Despite everything, my first instinct in a crisis was still to protect them from worry, to not be a burden. Mark handed me my phone. "Call them Courtney. Whatever else they are, they're your parents. They should be here." With trembling hands, I dialed the number I knew by heart. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice bright and distracted. "Courtney, is everything all right? I'm just on my way to a floral consultation for Heather's wedding." "Mom, I'm in the hospital." My voice cracked on the last word. "They found a tumor on my spine. I need surgery." There was a pause, and I could almost see her processing this inconvenient information. "Oh my goodness. How serious is it?" I explained what the doctors had told me. The 2-week timeline, the risks of paralysis, or worse, if untreated, the complexity of the surgery. "When exactly will the surgery be?" she asked, and I heard the anxiety in her voice, but not for the reason I hoped. "They're scheduling it now, probably next week or the week after. They said it can't wait longer than 2 weeks." Another pause, longer this time. "Courtney, you know your sister's wedding is in 3 weeks. We've been planning it for over a year." Of all the responses I had anticipated, this wasn't one of them. "Mom, did you hear what I said? This is emergency surgery. If I don't have it, I could be paralyzed. Or worse." Yes, of course I understand it's serious. But surely the doctors can work with your schedule. These hospitals always say things are urgent when there's actually flexibility. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There's no flexibility, Mom. This isn't elective surgery. It's already been growing for months. Every day we wait increases the risks. Let me talk to your father and call you back, she said, her tone shifting to the one she used when dealing with caterers who couldn't accommodate her demands. We'll figure something out. My father called an hour later. I had hoped he would be the voice of reason, the one to book the next flight to Chicago to be by my daughter's side during life-threatening surgery. Instead, he echoed my mother's concerns about the timing. Courtney, we've invested over $100,000 in this wedding. The venue has a no-refund policy at this point. The invitations have been sent to over 300 guests, many of whom have already booked flights. Dad, I'm not asking you to cancel the wedding. I'm asking you to be here for my surgery. Can't you postpone it just a few weeks? After the wedding, your mother and I can come stay with you during your recovery. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to, that they would step up when it really mattered, snapped. The doctors say I can't wait that long, but don't worry about it. I'll figure it out on my own. Now don't be dramatic, my father said, his lawyer voice taking over. We're not abandoning you. We'll hire the best post-surgical care, fly you to Boston after you're stable if needed. But Heather's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event that we've all been working toward for years. In that moment, the hierarchy was clearer than ever. Heather's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. My life-saving surgery was an inconvenience to be worked around. My last attempt was calling Heather directly. As a woman, a sister, surely she would understand the gravity of the situation. Oh my God, Courtney, that's awful, she said, and for a moment I thought I'd found my ally. Of course I'm concerned, but Mom and Dad are right. We can't change everything at this point. 300 guest court, Bradley's entire law firm, all the partners, his family is flying in from London. I understand that, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm not asking you to reschedule your wedding. I'm just asking for support during my surgery. Can't Mark be there? She asked, neatly delegating my crisis to my boyfriend of 18 months. Mom really can't leave now. She's managing all the vendors, and you know how she is about delegating. And Dad's walking me down the aisle giving the father of the bride speech. So you're all choosing a party over being there while I could die on an operating table. The words came out before I could stop them. Don't be so dramatic. Heather sighed, echoing our father's dismissal. You're not going to die. And it's not just a party, it's my wedding, the biggest day of my life. After hanging up, I sat in my hospital bed staring at the wall, a strange calm settling over me. All these years I'd been working to earn my place in a family that had never truly had room for me. I'd explained away their behavior, made excuses, blamed myself for not being what they wanted. But there was no explaining this away. The math was simple. Heather's wedding. Courtney's life. When Mark returned and asked how the calls went, I broke down again. Not from fear this time, but from the crushing finality of knowing where I stood. They're not coming, I said between sobs. The wedding is more important. Mark's face flushed with anger. Are you serious? They're choosing a wedding over being here when you could... He couldn't finish the sentence. Die, I supplied. Apparently that's me being dramatic. According to my family, this surgery is an inconvenience I've deliberately scheduled to interfere with Heather's special day. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hands in his. Then we'll be your family. Me, your friends, your colleagues. You won't go through this alone, Courtney. I promise. That night after Mark left, I made one more call. To my godmother, Patricia, in Seattle. Though not a blood relative, she had always been the one adult in my life who saw me, who celebrated my creativity rather than questioning it. Within hours of my call, she had booked a flight to Chicago, arranged for a leave of absence from her teaching position, and called to let me know she would be there the next day. You're not alone, sweetheart, she promised, her voice steady and sure. I'm coming, and I'll stay as long as you need me. As I drifted off to sleep that night in my hospital room, I realized that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who shows up when you need them most. The days before my surgery passed in a blur of medical consultations, tests, and paperwork. Mark took a leave of absence from his design firm to be with me around the clock. Patricia arrived as promised, bringing her warmth and calm efficiency to the chaos of my situation. The night before the surgery, as I lay in the hospital bed, with monitors beeping steadily around me, I wrote letters, just in case. One to Mark, telling him how deeply he was loved and encouraging him to find happiness if I didn't make it. One to Patricia, thanking her for being the mother I needed when my own wasn't available. I even wrote ones to my parents, and Heather, not out of bitterness, but in a final attempt to make them understand what they had missed in me. Dr. Abrams had been clear about the risks. The tumor's location made the surgery particularly delicate. While the prognosis was generally good, there was a small but real possibility of surgical complications, paralysis, or even death. I was 25 years old and facing my mortality alone, except for the chosen family who had stepped up when my blood relatives stepped back. Throughout those days, I checked my phone habitually, hoping for some sign that my family had reconsidered. Instead, I received only a formal email from my mother, with a detailed update on Heather's wedding preparations, concluding with, "We're sure everything will go fine with your procedure. Let us know if you need anything after your recovery begins." As if I were having a tooth extracted rather than undergoing life-threatening surgery. Meanwhile, my sister's Instagram was a steady stream of wedding countdown posts, bridal showers, and final dress fittings. Not once did she publicly or privately acknowledge what I was going through. The morning of the surgery arrived with a serene clarity. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but alongside it was a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened today would happen without my parents' support. That knowledge was both devastating and liberating. Mark was there as the nurses prepped me, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Patricia stood beside him, her hand warm and steady on my shoulder. "We'll be right here when you wake up," she promised. "Both of us." "What if I don't?" I asked, voicing the fear I'd been trying to suppress. "You will," Mark said fiercely. "But if something happens, know that you were loved, truly loved, for exactly who you are." The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took hold was thinking that maybe that was enough. To be loved for who you are, not what someone wishes you were or expects you to be, is perhaps the greatest gift anyone can receive. The surgery took 12 hours, 4 hours longer than expected due to the tumor's complexity. Patricia later told me they were the longest hours of her life sitting in the waiting room as updates came sporadically from the surgical team. Mark paced until his legs gave out, then sat staring at his phone, willing it to ring with a call from my parents saying they were on their way. It never came. When I finally woke in the ICU, groggy and in pain, but alive, the first faces I saw were Mark and Patricia. Not my parents, not my sister. The people who had chosen to be there, who had rearranged their lives without hesitation, because my life mattered to them. The surgery went well, Patricia told me, her voice thick with relief. They got the entire tumor. There were some complications, bleeding that took time to control, but Dr. Abrams says the prognosis is good. The recovery was brutal. A second surgery became necessary 3 days later when fluid began building around my spinal cord. The pain was constant and overwhelming. Simple movements I had taken for granted, turning in bed, sitting up, eventually standing, became monumental achievements. Through it all, my support system never wavered. My boss from the photography studio sent an enormous arrangement of sunflowers, with a card assuring me my job would be waiting whenever I was ready to return. My assistant Lila organized a schedule of friends and colleagues to visit, ensuring I was never alone during visiting hours. Even my landlord, a gruff man I barely knew, sent a handwritten note offering 2 months of free rent during my recovery. From my family, there was a generic floral arrangement with a card I later discovered had been ordered and signed by my mother's secretary. Heather sent a single text the day after her wedding. "Everything went perfectly. Hope you're feeling better. We'll call when we're back from honeymoon." She never called. 2 weeks into my hospital stay, as I was working with a physical therapist to stand for the first time since the surgery, Patricia handed me her phone. On the screen was my sister's wedding album on Facebook, a lavish affair in Napa Valley with my parents beaming proudly in every shot. In none of the posts or captions was there any mention of why I wasn't present. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their narrative. "Take them down," I said quietly to Mark that evening, nodding toward the family photos he had placed on my bedside table in the early days of my hospitalization. All of them. He understood immediately, removing each frame without question. In their place, he set up new photos. One of him and me on our trip to the Wisconsin Dells, another of Patricia and me from Christmas the previous year, and a group shot of my Chicago friends at a gallery opening. My real family. That night, as Patricia dozed in the recliner beside my bed, I made my decision. When I was well enough, I would cut contact with my parents and sister, not out of anger or revenge, but as an act of self-preservation. Some familial wounds go too deep to heal, while still in proximity to those who inflicted them. The road to physical recovery stretched before me like an impossible mountain. Learning to walk again was a process measured in excruciating millimeters. Each day brought small victories and devastating setbacks. The nerve damage from the tumor meant my right leg would likely never regain full strength or sensation. When I was finally discharged after a month in the hospital, Mark insisted I move in with him rather than return to my third-floor walk-up apartment. His first-floor condo with wide doorways became our new shared home, hastily adapted with shower rails and other accessibility features. As my body slowly healed, I began the harder work of emotional recovery. The abandonment by my family had left scars deeper than those from my surgeon's scalpel. What kind of parents choose a wedding over their child's life-threatening surgery? I asked my therapist, Dr. Levin, during one of our weekly sessions. The kind who see their children as extensions of themselves rather than as autonomous beings, she replied. Your success or failure in their eyes is a reflection on them. Your sister followed the script they wrote. You chose your own path. But to not even call, not even after. Dr. Levin's expression was compassionate but unflinching. Some parents are incapable of providing what their children need. It doesn't mean you deserved any less. Those sessions became the cornerstone of my recovery, not just from the surgery, but from a lifetime of conditional love and impossible standards. Slowly, I began to understand that the problem had never been me. I wasn't unworthy of love. They were incapable of loving me as I needed to be loved, and in that understanding, I found freedom. 1 year after my surgery, I stood in a small gallery in Chicago's River North District, leaning slightly on the sleek carbon fiber cane that had become my constant companion. Around me hung 20 large-format photographs, my new series titled Invisible Battles, featuring portraits of patients fighting serious illnesses, their resilience and humanity captured in stark black and white. The exhibition was my professional rebirth. During my recovery, I had discovered a new direction for my work, documentary photography, that revealed the beauty and dignity in struggle. The commercial fashion work that had once been my focus now seemed superficial, unable to convey the depth of human experience I now understood firsthand. This is extraordinary, Courtney, said Marcus, the gallery owner, as he surveyed the crowded opening. We've already sold 8 prints, and the Tribune reviewer is calling it unflinchingly honest and deeply moving. I smiled, scanning the room filled with friends, colleagues, and art lovers. Mark stood nearby, fielding questions from attendees, while keeping a watchful eye on me in case I needed to sit down. Patricia had flown in from Seattle specifically for the opening, proud tears in her eyes as she examined each photograph. What no one in the room knew was that earlier that day I had received a small envelope with a Boston postmark. Inside was a formal invitation to my parents' 30th anniversary celebration, with a handwritten note from my mother. We hope you can make it this time. It would mean so much to have both our girls there. No acknowledgement of what had happened, no apology, just an expectation that I would slot back into their lives as if they hadn't revealed their true priorities in the most painful way possible. I had slipped the invitation into the shredder without responding. That evening, as Mark and I celebrated the exhibition's success over dinner with Patricia, he surprised me by reaching into his jacket pocket and placing a small velvet box on the table. I've been waiting for the right moment, he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. I wanted to do this when you were surrounded by evidence of your strength and talent. Inside the box was a vintage emerald ring, not a diamond, because Mark knew me well enough to understand I'd prefer something unique and meaningful. Will you marry me, Courtney? Build a family with me. The kind of family that shows up, that sees you for the amazing woman you are. I hesitated not because I didn't love him. I did deeply, but because the word family now carried so much complicated weight. What if I'm like them? I whispered, giving voice to my deepest fear. What if I don't know how to be part of a healthy family? Patricia reached across the table, taking my free hand. Sweetheart, the fact that you're asking that question proves you're nothing like them. You've spent a year rebuilding yourself from the inside out. You know what not to do because you've lived it. Mark nodded in agreement. And we'll figure out the rest together, day by day. I looked at these two people who had held me through the darkest period of my life, who had seen me at my most vulnerable and loved me anyway. If this was family, chosen family, then yes, I wanted more of it. Yes, I said, sliding the ring onto my finger. Yes, to all of it. We planned a small wedding for the following spring. Just 30 guests, each one personally significant to our lives. When it came time to create the invitation list, Mark gently asked if I wanted to include my parents and sister. No, I said after careful consideration. This day is about celebrating love and support. They've demonstrated they're not capable of either. At least not for me. Patricia walked me down the aisle in a sunlit garden ceremony. My boss gave a heartfelt toast. My physical therapist, who had become a dear friend, caught the bouquet. It was perfect, not despite the absence of my biological family, but in many ways because of it. Every person present had earned their place through genuine love and support. 2 weeks after returning from our honeymoon in Quebec, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Heather's voice came through hesitant and unfamiliar after 2 years of silence. Courtney, it's me. I saw pictures of your wedding online. You looked beautiful. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Congratulations on your promotion. I saw the announcement in the Boston Globe. Despite everything, I still occasionally checked on my family from a distance, more out of habit than attachment. Thanks. An awkward pause followed. Look, I know things have been difficult. I've been thinking a lot about what happened with your surgery, and I wanted to see if maybe we could talk. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I had received from any of them in 2 years. Not an apology, not a real reckoning with what had happened, but at least a recognition that something had happened. I don't know, Heather, I said honestly. A lot has changed. I've changed. Mom and Dad ask about you sometimes, she offered, as if this might entice me. They saw your photography exhibit was featured in that national magazine. The fact that they were monitoring my success without reaching out directly told me everything I needed to know. They were interested in the accolades, the external validation of a daughter doing well, not in the person I had become. Tell them I'm doing fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. But I'm not ready to reopen that door yet. Maybe someday, but not now. I understand, Heather said, though I doubted she truly did. Just don't close the door forever, okay? We're still family. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at the phone. Blood ties weren't enough anymore, not after what I'd been through, not after building a life with people who showed up when it mattered. If my biological family wanted a relationship with me now, they would need to acknowledge the harm they had caused and demonstrate real change. Until then, I had all the family I needed. The next 4 years brought profound changes and growth. Mark and I moved to Denver for a fresh start, drawn by the vibrant arts community and my opportunity to join a prestigious documentary photography collective. My Invisible Battles series expanded into a book that received national attention for its unflinching portrayal of illness recovery and resilience. I established a small foundation to provide financial and logistical support for patients facing serious medical procedures without family support, a direct response to my own experience. Through this work, I connected with countless individuals whose stories of family abandonment echoed my own, creating a community of survivors who understood what it meant to rebuild from medical and emotional trauma. My health stabilized, though the nerve damage from the tumor left me with chronic pain and limited mobility in my right leg. Annual MRIs showed no recurrence, each clean scan, another year of life I hadn't been sure I would have. Through therapy and conscious effort, Mark and I built the kind of relationship I had never witnessed in my childhood home. One based on mutual respect, honest communication, and unwavering support. We created traditions and rituals that honored both our needs, learning as we went what it meant to be true partners. Patricia remained a constant in our lives, spending every Christmas with us and serving as a surrogate mother and grandmother figure. Through her, I learned what maternal love should look like: unconditional, generous, and affirming. Occasional updates about my biological family reached me through mutual acquaintances or social media. Heather's picture-perfect marriage was showing cracks, with rumors of Bradley's infidelity circulating in their social circle. My father had retired earlier than planned from his law practice, citing health concerns. My mother's social media remained a carefully curated showcase of Boston society events, with no hint of the family fracture that had occurred. None of them reached out directly after that single call from Heather, and I made no effort to initiate contact. The wound had scarred over, still visible, still part of me, but no longer actively painful as long as I kept my distance. Then came the biggest change of all, after careful consideration and multiple consultations with specialists to ensure my health could handle it. Mark and I decided to try for a child. The journey wasn't easy. My medical history complicated the process. But eventually we received the news we'd been hoping for. I was pregnant. As my body changed to accommodate new life, I experienced a complex whirlwind of emotions. Joy, certainly, and anticipation, but also fear. Not just the normal anxieties of impending parenthood, but deeper concerns about my ability to break the cycles of conditional love and favoritism I had experienced. Would I know how to be the parent my child deserved when I had such flawed models? "You're already doing it," my therapist assured me. "You're questioning, reflecting, working to be conscious of these patterns. That's how you break the cycle." Mark and I chose not to inform my biological family about the pregnancy. This child would be surrounded from birth with people who had proven their love and commitment, not those who had demonstrated the opposite. At 32, I found myself more settled and content than I had ever imagined possible in those dark days after my surgery. My career was thriving, my marriage strong, my chosen family a source of constant support, and a new life growing inside me. If my journey had taught me anything, it was that happiness often comes not from getting what you think you want, but from building something beautiful from what you actually have. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, as I worked in my home office, the doorbell rang. The sound of the doorbell was unexpected. We weren't anticipating any deliveries, and most of our friends texted before stopping by. Assuming it was probably a neighbor or a package requiring signature, I made my way carefully to the front door, one hand resting protectively on my 7 months pregnant belly. When I opened the door, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Standing on my porch looking older and somehow diminished were my parents. My father's hair had gone completely gray, new lines etched deeply around his eyes. My mother, always impeccably put together, looked uncharacteristically disheveled, her designer outfit wrinkled as if they had been traveling for hours. Both stared at me with an unsettling mixture of desperation and shock, their eyes immediately dropping to my pregnant belly. For a moment, I considered closing the door. After 7 years of silence, 7 years during which they had made no genuine attempt to understand the pain they had caused or rebuild our relationship, they had no right to simply appear on my doorstep. But then my father did something I had never seen before. He began to cry. Not the dignified single tear of sentimentality I had occasionally witnessed at formal events, but deep body-shaking sobs that seemed to rise from some long-buried place. "Courtney," he managed between breaths. "Please, we need to talk to you." Curiosity more than compassion moved me to step aside and gesture them in. 20 minutes, I said, my voice steady. "That's all I can offer right now." They followed me into the living room, my mother's eyes darting around, taking in the evidence of the life I had built without them. The awards displayed on the bookshelf, the wedding photo of Mark and me, the half-finished nursery visible through an open door down the hall. "Sit down," I directed, lowering myself carefully into an armchair, while they perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa. "Why are you here? How did you even find my address?" "Your website," my mother said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "Your business address. We went there first, but they said you were working from home because of—" Her eyes flickered again to my pregnant belly. "The baby," I supplied flatly. "Yes, I'm pregnant. Due in about 8 weeks. "You look well," my father offered, clearly struggling for normalcy in this surreal situation. "Your work has been getting a lot of attention. We saw the feature in National Geographic. And the foundation you started. If you came all this way to make small talk about my career, you've wasted your time," I interrupted. "What do you want?" They exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. My mother reached for her purse, pulling out a tissue to dab at her eyes. "It's Heather," my father finally said. "She's sick, Courtney. Very sick." Something cold settled in the pit of my stomach. "What kind of sick?" "She has a tumor," my mother said, her voice breaking. "On her spine, the same type you had. The doctors say it's genetic that siblings have a higher risk, but we never thought—" "An ependymoma," I asked, medical terminology I had never wanted to think about again, suddenly at the forefront of my mind. My father nodded. "In almost the same location as yours was, but larger, they think. More advanced." The irony was so perfect, it was almost laughable. After choosing Heather's wedding over my life-saving surgery, they were now facing the exact same crisis with their favored daughter. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I wouldn't wish what I had endured on anyone, especially not a blood relative with the same genetic predisposition. "But I still don't understand why you're here." My mother leaned forward, desperation evident in every line of her body. "The insurance won't cover all of it. The specialist, she needs the type of surgery. We've spent everything we had. The market crash took most of your father's retirement, and the law firm hasn't been doing well." "So you need money," I said bluntly. "After 7 years of silence, you show up at my door because you need my money." "Not just money," my father corrected quickly. "Though, yes, we're desperate. But also, your experience, your connections. Your foundation helps people in exactly this situation. And the specialist who saved you, Dr. Abrams, she's the best in the country for this type of tumor. Heather needs her, but she's booked solid for months." I sat back, absorbing the full absurdity of the situation. "Let me make sure I understand. 7 years ago, when I had this exact surgery, neither of you could be bothered to be there. You chose a wedding over my life. Now that Heather needs the same surgery, you expect me to open my wallet and use my connections to help her." "We know we made a terrible mistake," my mother said, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away before she could touch me. "We've regretted it every day since." "Have you?" I challenged. "Because this is the first I'm hearing of it. 7 years and not one genuine apology. Not one acknowledgement of the pain you caused. Just silence until you needed something." My father's face crumpled again. "We thought you needed space. After the things you said in that letter." The letter. I had almost forgotten the letter I wrote the night before my surgery, pouring out years of hurt and disappointment in what I thought might be my final communication with them. "Space," I repeated incredulously. I didn't need space. I needed parents who would show up when their daughter might die on an operating table. I needed the kind of unconditional love you always gave Heather. "We do love you," my mother insisted. "We've always loved you." "Not enough," I said quietly. "Not enough to be there when it mattered most." The doorbell rang again, and I heard Mark's key in the lock simultaneously. He entered, carrying grocery bags, stopping short when he saw my unexpected visitors. "Mr. and Mrs. Warner," he said, his voice cooling as recognition dawned. He immediately came to my side, one hand resting protectively on my shoulder. "This is unexpected." "Mark," my father acknowledged with a nod. "You look well." My mother's eyes had fixed on Mark's supportive gesture, then moved to the wedding photo on the mantel, realization dawning. You got married. 3 years ago, I confirmed. It was a beautiful ceremony, small, intimate, just the people who have actually been there for us. The barb hit its mark, my mother flinching visibly. Mark squeezed my shoulder gently, a silent question about whether I was okay. I nodded almost imperceptibly, and he excused himself to put the groceries away, though I knew he would stay within earshot. Courtney, please, my father said, his voice breaking. We know we don't deserve your help. We know we failed you. But this isn't about us. It's about your sister. She could die. I was aware of that possibility too, I reminded him. When I called begging you to come and you told me Heather's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event that couldn't be postponed. We were wrong, my mother admitted, tears streaming freely now. So terribly wrong. And if we could go back and change it, we would. But we can't. All we can do is beg you to be better than we were, to not punish Heather for our mistakes. Her words struck home in a way nothing else had. Was that what I would be doing if I refused punishing Heather to hurt my parents? Becoming like them, withholding help when it was desperately needed? The thought made me deeply uncomfortable. I had spent years building a life defined by compassion and support for others in medical crisis. My foundation existed specifically to help people facing serious medical procedures without adequate support, people exactly like Heather was now. Mark returned, leaning against the doorframe with arms crossed, his expression making it clear he had heard enough to understand the situation. How is Heather taking all this? I asked, realizing she wasn't with them. Why didn't she come herself? My parents exchanged another glance. She's in the hospital, my father explained. The tumor is pressing on her spinal cord, causing significant pain and some loss of function in her legs. She's afraid you would refuse to see her after the way she treated you. She sent this, my mother added, extracting an envelope from her purse and holding it out to me. I took it reluctantly, recognizing Heather's handwriting immediately. Inside was a card with a simple message: I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. I understand now what you went through, and I'm ashamed of how I acted. Whether you help me or not, I want you to know that I regret the last 7 years of silence. Love, Heather. It wasn't elaborate, but it was more genuine than anything I had received from any of them before this moment. Mark moved to stand behind my chair, a solid presence of support. What exactly are you asking for? He asked my parents, his tone businesslike. My father straightened, seeming grateful for the practical question. Financial help with the specialists not covered by insurance, and if possible, a connection to Dr. Abrams. The doctors in Boston say time is of the essence, just as they did with Courtney. And where is Bradley in all this? I asked. Isn't he a partner at his firm now? Surely he has resources. Another uncomfortable glance between my parents. They're separated, my mother admitted. It's been a difficult year. Bradley, well, there was another woman, a paralegal at his firm. The perfect marriage from the perfect wedding had crumbled. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Heather despite everything. I need some time to think about this, I said, standing up to signal the conversation was over. I'll call you tomorrow. Of course, my father said quickly, rising and helping my mother to her feet. We're staying at the Marriott downtown, room 512. Here's my cell number. He handed me a business card with his personal number written on the back. As I showed them to the door, my mother paused, her eyes falling on a framed ultrasound photo magneted to the refrigerator. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl? She asked hesitantly. A girl, I replied after a moment's pause. We're naming her Lily Patricia. The middle name was a deliberate statement, an acknowledgement of the woman who had been more of a mother to me than Elizabeth Warner had ever been. My mother's face registered the significance, fresh pain flickering across her features. That's a beautiful name, she said softly. I hope we might meet her. After they left, Mark wrapped his arms around me, holding me as the emotions I had carefully controlled during their visit finally broke free. I cried for the young woman I had been so desperate for parental love that had never been freely given. I cried for Heather facing the same terrifying diagnosis I had endured. and I cried for the impossible position I now found myself in, torn between righteous anger and basic human compassion. "What are you thinking?" Mark asked when my tears finally subsided. "I'm thinking about what I would tell anyone else in this situation," I admitted. "I'm thinking about what I built my foundation on, the belief that no one should face life-threatening illness without support regardless of circumstances." "This is different," Mark pointed out. "These people abandoned you when you needed them most." "Yes," I agreed. "And if it were just about them, the decision would be easy. But it's not. It's about Heather facing the same nightmare I did. It's about whether I can live with myself if I don't help when I have the means and connections to do so." Mark studied my face, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're going to help her, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. "I'm going to help with the medical situation. Dr. Abrams would take my call, and the foundation could cover some of the costs. That's literally what it exists for. But that doesn't mean I'm ready for reconciliation, especially not with my parents." "I understand," Mark said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "And I support whatever you decide. Just promise me you'll protect yourself emotionally. Set boundaries. Don't let them pull you back into old patterns." "I promise," I said, resting my forehead against his. I learned that lesson the hard way. Never again. That night I called Dr. Abrams, explaining the situation without emotion. She remembered me, of course. I had been one of her most complex cases, and we had stayed in loose contact through my foundation work. "Genetic predisposition in siblings is rare, but documented with ependymomas," she confirmed after hearing about Heather. "I can arrange to see her case records, and if it's as serious as you describe, I'll find a way to fit her in." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me despite the complicated emotions. "The foundation will cover whatever insurance doesn't, just like we do for other patients." "Courtney," Dr. Abrams said gently, "are you sure you're prepared for this emotionally re-engaging with family who hurt you so deeply, especially during your pregnancy?" "I'm not re-engaging," I clarified. "I'm helping a fellow patient access the care she needs. The fact that she's my sister is secondary." But as I hung up the phone, I wondered if such neat compartmentalization was really possible. Blood ties, however damaged, have a way of complicating everything they touch. The following weeks unfolded in a surreal blur of medical coordination and careful boundary setting. True to my word, I contacted my parents the next day with a clear proposal. The foundation would help cover Heather's medical expenses, and I had arranged for her case to be reviewed by Dr. Abrams, who would likely be able to perform the surgery within the month if the case was deemed appropriate. "This isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation," I explained firmly during a tense coffee meeting with my parents. "This is about doing the right thing for someone facing a life-threatening condition, which happens to be the mission of my foundation." "We understand," my father said, though the hope in his eyes suggested otherwise. "But we're grateful. More than you can know." "There are conditions," I continued. "I'll work with Heather directly on her medical care. I'll arrange for her consultation with Dr. Abrams and coordinate with the foundation's patient advocate. But I'm not ready for a family reunion. I'm 7 months pregnant, and my priority is maintaining a healthy, stress-free environment for myself and my baby." My mother's eyes kept drifting to my pregnant belly, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. Would it be possible for us to speak with Heather while she's consulting with the specialist, just to know what's happening?" "That's up to Heather," I replied. "She's an adult, but I've made it clear to Dr. Abrams that I'm not serving as a family liaison. This is a patient-doctor relationship, and Heather's medical information is private." Setting these boundaries felt foreign but necessary. For so long, I had been the one desperately seeking approval and inclusion. Now, I was the one with the power to set terms and conditions, a reversal that clearly disoriented my parents as much as it did me. 2 days later, I drove alone to the hospital where Dr. Abrams had arranged to see Heather as a special consultation. I had debated having Mark accompany me, but ultimately decided this was something I needed to do independently. This was about closing a chapter of my life, not opening a new one that would include my parents in our family's future. Seeing Heather after 7 years was jarring. My glamorous, always put together sister lay in a hospital bed looking small and frightened. Her designer clothes were replaced by a standard hospital gown, her perfectly highlighted hair limp around a face etched with pain. When she saw me standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears. "Courtney," she whispered, "you came." I moved into the room, keeping a careful emotional distance despite the pull of our shared history. "Dr. Abrams will be here shortly. She's the best. She saved my life when I had my tumor." Heather nodded, tears spilling over. "Thank you for arranging this. When Mom and Dad told me they were going to find you, I told them not to bother. Why would you help me after everything?" The question hung in the air between us, honest in a way our family conversations rarely were. "Because no one should go through this alone," I said simply, "and because I know exactly how terrifying this diagnosis is." "I do now too," Heather admitted, gesturing weakly to her legs. "The pain, the numbness." When the doctor showed me the MRI and explained what was happening, all I could think was that this is what you went through while I was obsessing over floral arrangements and bridesmaid dresses. Her directness surprised me. The Heather I remembered was expert at glossing over uncomfortable truths, at maintaining the picture-perfect facade our parents had taught us to value above all else. "The surgery is scary," I acknowledged, "and the recovery is brutal. But Dr. Abrams is brilliant, and you caught it before any permanent damage occurred. Your prognosis should be good." "Were you scared?" she asked, vulnerability naked on her face. "Before your surgery, terrified," I admitted. "I wrote goodbye letters the night before just in case." Heather's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Courtney. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. That we weren't there. It's unforgivable." "It's in the past," I said, not quite ready to offer absolution, but recognizing the sincerity in her apology. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you through this." Dr. Abrams arrived then, her familiar no-nonsense demeanor bringing a wave of déjà vu. She greeted me warmly before turning her full attention to Heather, explaining the procedure in the same direct but compassionate way she had with me years before. "I've reviewed your scans and records," she concluded after a thorough examination. "The tumor is operable though complex due to its location. I have an opening next Thursday if you're willing to travel to Chicago for the procedure." "Yes," Heather said immediately, "whatever it takes." As Dr. Abrams continued outlining the surgical plan and risks, I watched my sister absorb the information with the same determined focus she had applied to legal briefs and wedding plans. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of connection, the shared experience of facing mortality creating a bridge across the years of silence. When Dr. Abrams finished and stepped out to arrange the necessary paperwork, Heather turned to me, her expression earnest. "Will you be there?" she asked quietly. "For the surgery, I know I have no right to ask, but I'm scared, Courtney. Really scared." The question caught me off guard. I had planned to arrange her care from a distance, maintaining the emotional boundaries I had so carefully constructed. But looking at her, my sister, my blood despite everything, I felt the walls I had built beginning to crack. "I'll make sure you have everything you need," I said carefully. "The Foundation's patient advocate will be with you throughout." "That's not what I'm asking," Heather pressed. "I'm asking if you will be there, not as a Foundation representative, as my sister." The blunt honesty between us felt foreign and strangely liberating. For once, we weren't playing the roles assigned to us by our parents, golden child and afterthought. We were simply two women connected by blood and a shared medical crisis. "I'll be there before the surgery," I conceded. "But I can't promise more than that right now. I'm in my 3rd trimester, Heather. I need to be careful about stress." She nodded, accepting this limited offering with visible gratitude. "I understand. And congratulations, by the way. Mom and Dad mentioned you're having a girl." "Thank you. We're naming her Lily Patricia." "After your godmother," Heather noted. "The one who was there for your surgery." "Yes, that's fitting," she said softly. "She was more of a mother to you than Mom ever managed to be." The acknowledgement, so simple but so profound, loosened something that had been tightly wound inside me for years. For the first time, someone in my family had voiced aloud the truth I had always known, but had been made to doubt that the failure had been theirs, not mine. As I prepared to leave, Heather reached for my hand. "Whatever happens with the surgery, thank you for this, for not turning your back on me the way we turned our backs on you. It's more than I deserve." I squeezed her fingers briefly before withdrawing. "Get some rest. Dr. Abrams will want you as strong as possible before the procedure." Walking out of that hospital room, I felt lighter somehow, as if setting down a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Helping Heather wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting the past. It was about being the kind of person I wanted to be. Someone whose actions were guided by compassion rather than score settling. Someone who could show my daughter what true strength looked like. The next week passed in a flurry of arrangements. Heather was transferred to Chicago for pre-surgical testing and preparation. My parents followed, staying at a hotel near the hospital, their texts updating me on her condition, carefully respectful of the boundaries I had established. The morning of Heather's surgery, I arrived at the hospital earlier than planned. Through the window of her room, I could see my parents sitting vigil at her bedside, my mother clutching her hand, my father pacing nervously by the window. The scene was painfully familiar, but with all the roles reversed. My mother noticed me first, saying something to Heather before coming to meet me in the hallway. "She's been asking for you," she said, her usual commanding presence subdued. "The anesthesiologist will be here soon." I nodded, steeling myself before entering the room. My father looked up as I approached Heather's bed, relief evident on his face. "I'll give you two some privacy," he said, guiding my mother toward the door, despite her obvious reluctance to leave. Alone with my sister, I was struck by how small she seemed in the hospital bed, hooked to the same monitors that had once tracked my vital signs. Her expression brightened when she saw me, though fear still shadowed her eyes. "You came," she said. "I said I would." I settled carefully into the chair beside her bed, my pregnant belly making movement increasingly cumbersome. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But also ready, I think. Dr. Abrams explained everything so thoroughly. She said you helped develop a patient education program after your surgery." I nodded. Knowledge helps with the fear, I found, even when the knowledge is scary. Heather was quiet for a moment, seemingly gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "Courtney, if something happens, if things go wrong—" "They won't," I interrupted. "Dr. Abrams is the best." "But if they do," she persisted, "I need you to know something. The day of your surgery, when I was getting my final dress fitting while you were fighting for your life, that's my biggest regret. Not the failed marriage, not the career choices I've questioned. That day, choosing a dress over my sister." The raw honesty of her words caught me off guard. This wasn't the perfectly polished Heather I had grown up with, always careful to present the right image rather than the messy truth. "What made you finally understand?" I asked. "Being in this bed," she replied simply. "Facing the same diagnosis, experiencing the fear, the pain, the uncertainty, and realizing that I went through a meaningless ceremony that ended in divorce while you faced death alone." She paused, wiping away tears. "Well, not alone. You had people who truly loved you, just not your family, not the people who should have been there without question." Before I could respond, the anesthesiologist arrived, accompanied by a nurse, to begin pre-surgical preparations. As they explained the procedure to Heather, I started to excuse myself, but she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Will you stay until they take me in?" she asked, the fear in her voice unmistakable. "Please." I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll stay." My parents returned, hovering awkwardly at the foot of the bed while the medical team completed their preparations. The four of us together in that small room created a strange echo of the family we had once been, but with all the hidden fractures now plainly visible. When they finally came to take Heather to surgery, she squeezed my hand one last time. "Whatever happens, thank you for being the better person, for showing me what real strength looks like." As they wheeled her away, my mother collapsed into silent tears, while my father stood stoically by the window, his jaw working as he fought for control. I found myself in the surreal position of being the calm one, the experienced one, the one who had been through this before and survived. The surgery will take at least 8 hours. I told them, slipping naturally into the role of information provider that I had played countless times through my foundation work. There's a dedicated waiting area on the surgical floor with better chairs and a private consultation room where Dr. Abrams will update you afterward. My mother looked up, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. Will you wait with us? The question hung in the air between us. Not just about the immediate situation, but about all the years of distance, all the hurt and abandonment. No, I said gently but firmly. Mark is picking me up soon. I've arranged for the Foundation's patient advocate to stay with you through the surgery. She'll keep me updated, and I'll check in by phone. My father nodded understanding and resignation in his expression. That's more than fair. More than we deserve, really. This isn't about what anyone deserves, I replied, gathering my things. It's about doing what's right regardless of history. As I waited for Mark in the hospital lobby, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 7 years ago, I had been the vulnerable one, frightened and abandoned by the family who should have been my strongest support. Now, I was the one with the power to help or hurt, to extend compassion or withhold it. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, nor was the fact that I had chosen differently than they had. Not because I was inherently better, but because I had learned from their failures. In refusing to repeat their pattern of abandonment, I had broken a destructive cycle that might otherwise have continued into the next generation. When Mark arrived, his concerned expression softened at the sight of me. How did it go? Are you okay? I'm okay, I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Better than I expected, actually. There's something freeing about helping without expecting anything in return. He smiled, helping me into the car. That's who you are, Courtney. It's who you've always been. It's one of the things I love most about you. As we drove home, I placed a protective hand over my belly, feeling Lily Patricia shift and kick beneath my palm. I want our daughter to understand the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, I said. That you can help someone, can wish them well without necessarily allowing them back into your life. Do you think you'll ever want reconciliation with your parents? Mark asked carefully. I don't know, I answered honestly. Today was about Heather and her medical needs. The bigger questions about family relationships, those will take more time. And any reconciliation would have to be on very different terms than before. Over the following days, I received updates through the Foundation's advocate. The surgery had been successful, though complicated by the tumor's size and location. Heather was facing a recovery similar to what I had endured. Months of physical therapy, pain management, and gradual rehabilitation. A week after the surgery, when Heather was stable and beginning the long road to recovery, I visited her again in the hospital. This time Mark accompanied me, his silent support a reassuring presence. As we entered her room, my parents were there, looking exhausted but relieved. Their eyes widened at the sight of Mark, whom they had barely acknowledged during our previous encounters. You must be Mark, my father said, extending his hand. We didn't properly meet before. Thank you for all you've done for our daughter. Mark shook his hand with cautious politeness. Courtney has done it all herself. I just support her choices. The pointed comment wasn't lost on any of us. Heather was awake, propped up against pillows, her face pale, but her eyes clearer than before the surgery. Courtney, she smiled weakly. And Mark, thank you for coming. My parents excused themselves tactfully, leaving us alone with Heather. The conversation was easier than I had expected, focused mainly on her recovery, the physical therapy challenges ahead, and the support systems she would need. Dr. Abrams said you created a patient guidebook, she mentioned, for people recovering from spinal surgeries. She gave me a copy. It's remarkable, Courtney. So thorough, so compassionate. You thought of everything. I had firsthand experience, I reminded her, and I had help. A lot of patients contributed their insights. Still, to take your trauma and turn it into something that helps others, that's special. She hesitated, then added, "I'd like to contribute if you're open to it. Maybe a section on navigating the legal and insurance challenges. Once I'm back on my feet, of course." The offer surprised me. Not just the practical suggestion, but the implicit acknowledgement that our relationship might continue beyond this immediate crisis. "We could discuss that," I agreed cautiously. "The foundation is always looking to expand our resources." As we were preparing to leave, Heather asked the question I had been expecting. "Will you bring the baby to meet me? Once she's born, I'd like to be an aunt to her if you'll allow it." The request hung in the air between us. Simple on the surface, but laden with implications about the future, about family connections I had long since written off. "We'll see," I said, not wanting to make promises I might not keep. "One step at a time, Heather." She nodded, accepting this non-commitment with grace I wouldn't have expected from her before. "One step at a time," she echoed. "That's all any of us can do." In the corridor outside her room, we encountered my parents waiting anxiously by the elevators. My mother stepped forward hesitantly. "Courtney, before you go, could we talk for just a moment?" I glanced at Mark, who squeezed my hand in support. "A moment," I agreed. "We've been thinking," my father began awkwardly, "about everything that's happened, about the mistakes we've made. We know we can't undo the past, but we wondered if there might be a way forward." "What kind of way forward?" I asked, wary of vague promises that committed them to nothing specific. My mother surprised me by being direct for once in her life. "We'd like the chance to be grandparents to your daughter, to do better with her than we did with you. But we understand that would have to be on your terms with boundaries you set." The request was simultaneously presumptuous and vulnerable, typical of my mother yet different in its acknowledgement that she had no right to make demands. "I can't answer that today," I said after a long moment. "This situation with Heather has been overwhelming, and I need to focus on my pregnancy right now. Whatever relationship you might have with my daughter in the future would depend on how you relate to me and Mark as her parents, and that would require real changes, not just words." "We understand," my father said, though disappointment shadowed his features. "But we're willing to do the work whatever it takes, to prove ourselves worthy of a second chance." As Mark and I drove home that day, I considered the strange symmetry of life, how the same diagnosis that had revealed my family's true priorities 7 years ago had now created an opportunity for healing, or at least for honest reckoning. "What are you thinking?" Mark asked as we pulled into our driveway. "I'm thinking that helping Heather was the right thing to do," I said slowly. "But that doesn't mean I'm ready to welcome my parents back into my life with open arms. Any relationship going forward would have to be completely different from what came before." "And what would that look like?" he prompted. I smiled, placing his hand on my belly, where Lily Patricia was performing her daily acrobatics. "It would look like respect, like boundaries that are honored, not crossed, like treating our daughter as a person to love, not a performance to evaluate, like acknowledging the harm they caused rather than pretending it never happened." "Do you think they're capable of that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know that I'm not the same frightened, approval-seeking person I was 7 years ago. I know my worth now, and I won't settle for less than I deserve. And neither will our daughter." 2 months later, as I held my newborn daughter in my arms, the clarity that had begun with my parents' unexpected appearance on my doorstep solidified into certainty. The cycle of conditional love and favoritism that had defined my childhood would end with me. Lily Patricia would grow up knowing she was valued for exactly who she was. Not for what she accomplished, not for how well she followed someone else's script, but for her unique, precious self. The journey of healing family wounds is rarely straightforward. Some breaks can never be fully mended. Some trust once shattered can never be completely restored. But in helping Heather when she needed it most, in choosing compassion over retribution, I had freed myself from the weight of resentment I hadn't realized I was still carrying. My parents and I are still finding our way forward, slowly, cautiously, with professional help and clear boundaries. They've met Lily Patricia under supervised conditions, and I watch them carefully for any signs of the old patterns emerging. So far, they seem genuinely committed to doing better, though only time will tell if that commitment holds. Heather and I have developed a more honest relationship than we ever had growing up. As she recovered from her surgery, experiencing the same pain limitations and gradual healing that I had, the artificial hierarchy that had separated us dissolved. We became simply two sisters who had survived the same ordeal, who understood each other's scars in ways no one else could. The foundation continues to grow now, with a legal advocacy component that Heather helps oversee during her ongoing recovery. Working together has allowed us to rebuild a connection based on mutual respect, rather than competition or resentment. If my journey has taught me anything, it's that family isn't defined by blood alone. Family is defined by who shows up when it matters most, by who sees you for who you truly are and loves you anyway, by who stays when it would be easier to leave. Sometimes those people share your DNA, sometimes they don't. What matters isn't the relationship on paper, but the one you build through actions, through choices, through love, that doesn't come with conditions or expectations. As for forgiveness, that complex ongoing process that can't be rushed or forced, I've learned it isn't something you do for the other person. It's something you do for yourself. Not to excuse what happened, but to release its power over you. Not to forget, but to move forward unburdened by the weight of what might have been. The family I've created with Mark and Lily Patricia isn't perfect. No family is. But it's built on honesty, respect, and unconditional love, the foundation my parents never managed to provide. And in that, I found not just healing, but triumph. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship with family after a major betrayal? How did you handle setting boundaries while allowing for the possibility of healing? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the family we choose matters more than the one we're born into.